My name is Ray Kearney, and I was chairman of the Lane Cove Tunnel Action Group for some 13 years until it was opened in about 2005. And during that time, it gave me an enormous amount of experience at working at the interface with the bureaucrats and the government and some of the so-called experts, dealing with air pollution, stacks, filtration and such like. Let me just point out an important principle in law. Where there is a foreseeable and preventable risk of harm to your neighbour, the owner has a duty of care to remove that risk. The owner in this case is often Transurban. Transurban pays no tax. Transurban acquires billions of dollars of income from tolls, and yet, as the owner, it transfers the impacts on health from the pollution coming out of those stacks onto you, the taxpayer. This, I believe, is a breach of duty and should be investigated fully. Unfortunately, the state governments have patronised Transurban, and hence we have a situation where stacks remain unfiltered. Let me also highlight an important point, and that is the pollution that comes out of the motor vehicles is proven to cause health impacts of a range of kinds, and has been known for many, many years. But what does the New South Wales Health do? And what do the EPA do, the OEH do, and the RTA, etc. do? They fabricate and falsify information, such that they will hoodwink and have hoodwinked the ministers of the respective portfolios of the truth. Let me give you one example. A filtration system was installed in the M5 East some years ago as a consequence of some of these outcomes of the parliamentary inquiries. The filtration system was then tested, and who should be called in to tests? None other than CSIRO. After 18 months, a press release came out. Press release was released by the then Minister for Roads, Duncan Gay. And the first statements say that after rigorous testing, research investigation, data collection, the filtration system was shown not to be effective. Well, that was in contrast to all that had been known from abroad, where the filtration systems in Japan, Sweden, Norway, etc., had been proven to be effective. So what prompted me was to investigate the CSIRO investigation. And lo and behold, they excluded the particles coming out of the tailpipe. Can you believe it? Here was a con job where only the particles that are irrelevant to the tailpipe were measured. I spoke to Duncan Gay and told him that he'd been hoodwinked. And he then reversed his decision not to shut down the filtration. And it remained on in operation for at least 2 more years until he retired. Then it was shut down. Shut down by the bureaucrats who are fabricating and falsifying information to deceive you, the member of the community, who pays taxes, and as that saying says, desiderata, you are a child of the universe, nothing less than the trees and the stars, and you have a right to live. But that's not so with the bureaucrats. So, what are we looking at? We're looking at projects which are ratified by bureaucrats, signed off by the respective ministers. And we also have so-called scientific advisory committees headed by and chaired by the Chief Scientist of New South Wales, when those reports are filled with fabricated and false information. They want you to believe that when the pollution comes out of the stack, it disappears. Not so. Not so. The evidence is very clear. You've only got to stand across the harbour and look at a moored cruise ship belching out plumes from its funnel, and you'll see a kilometre downstream and downwind the pollution is at ground level. So it doesn't disperse, but they will have you to believe that it does. The other thing you need to keep in mind is, if the stack is blowing wind in that direction and the pollution is bouncing along the ground in that direction, and nearby there's another stack blowing in that direction, you've got these two plumes bouncing along the ground, exposing residents. And when the wind changes in that direction, people here are getting much, much higher pollution. Here, previously, it was going that way, those people, when it goes that way, you see, but they never put their monitors at the cross. Why? Because it will show exceedances of the standards. And let me also point out, when we talk about standards and guidelines, the National Environment Protection Measure for particles comes under different categories. PM10. PM stands for particulate matter, 10 micrometers in diameter. The fact is, according to Professor Lydia Morozka, an international expert of no comparison, she has said PM10 bears no relationship to the particles coming out of the tailpipe. Yet that's a standard. Only 3% of what comes out of the tailpipe is in the PM10. So what do they use? An irrelevant standard. But then they come down to PM2.5. PM2.5 is only partially measuring what comes out the tailpipe. According to Professor Morozka, the peak levels of particles are around about 0.1 micrometer in diameter. The point being made is that the standards and the guidelines are not enforceable, standards are, that the current standards are not appropriate for measuring tailpipe pollution. And keep this in mind. The National NEPM National Environment Protection measures do not apply to pollution coming from stacks. They don't apply to point source pollution. But what do the bureaucrats do? They permit it. They permit it. Again, case of they who know not, and know not that they know not, are fools. Professor Lydia Marowska also highlighted, nearly 20 years ago, that weighing particles, measuring particles by weight, bears no relationship to health risk. It's the surface area. The surface area. But what do the bureaucrats do? They ignore that. Let me give you an analogy. Here you've got a kilogram of grapes representing PM10. And over here is a kilogram of sugar representing the fine particles. The surface area difference can be 1,000-fold, but they're the same weight. These dissolve. Inhale down the lung, the fine particles dissolve and offload their cancer-causing cargo. Diesel fumes have been declared by the WHO to be a level 1 human carcinogen. There's nothing more carcinogenic. And within diesel fumes, you have carcinogens which are used to induce mammary tumours, breast cancers in experimental animals such as rats. There's a 65% increase in the sale of diesel. Where's the responsibility of our bureaucrats in removing a health risk? Where? The owner has a duty of care to remove that risk of health where it is proven, and it is. Weight for weight, tobacco, smoke, and diesel fumes. Diesel fumes are 40 times more carcinogenic than tobacco. But they don't allow you to smoke in certain places, but the pollution is ignored. You see, we're dealing with fools, people who know not and know not that they know not. I would like to think that there be a review right across the board of our bureaucrats who are well entrenched and have captured the art of fabrication and falsification to hoodwink the respective ministers. And that's the situation we have today. That it's high time that people in the community who pay their taxes ask the questions. Why is it so? Many years ago, former Premier of New South Wales, Bob Carr, he changed the legislation to redefine a public servant. Today, a public servant has a responsibility to serve the minister, not the public, the minister of the respective portfolio. And that means, whilst we can change governments and politicians, the same bureaucrats remain embedded within the system. And they've learnt the art to hoodwink ministers and to hoodwink the public by fabricating, falsifying information. And we see it day in and day out, right across the board. in all kinds of departments: biosecurity, environment, roads, transport, etc., etc. We've had enough.